Draw your chair a little closer to the hearth today. The fire is burning low.
It's cold out there.
It really is. Outside, the winter wind is howling, just rattling the glass in the window panes. But in here, right now, we are sitting with the ghosts of the American founding.
We really are. And it's a heavy, heavy presence today.
Yeah. Today, you and I are looking at a man who gave us a country, but, well, he paid for it with absolute personal misery. We are looking past the polished marble statues to the flesh and blood, the agonizing isolation and the creeping shadows that define the life of John Adams.
Right.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Usually we tackle our subjects with a certain, bright, fast-paced energy. But the atmosphere today demands something different.
It absolutely does.
Something weary, deeply reflective, and brutally honest about the toll of history.
Yeah, it is a heavy history we are sitting with today. Because when you spend enough time looking into the lives of the founders, you realize that the triumphal paintings, they only tell a fraction of the story.
Just a tiny fraction.
Right. The real human narrative is often suffocating. It's paid for in devastating choices, in prolonged alienation, and in the bittersweet twilight of lives that gave everything to a cause that, quite frankly, often resented them for it.
Exactly. And the stack of sources feeding our fire today paints a vivid, almost heartbreaking picture of exactly that kind of sacrifice. We are drawing from David McCullough's Pulitzer-winning biography, John Adams.
An incredible book.
Truly. Also, R.B. Bernstein's masterful study, The Education of John Adams. We've got some incredibly detailed historical transcripts from C-SPAN, illuminating essays from the Miller Center, the Ashbrook Center's analysis on reconciliation, and Christopher Piersnick's reflections on historical legacy.
That is a dense, incredible stack of kindling for this discussion.
It is. And together, these are our guide into the mind of the second president of the United States.
Right. And our mission today is not to recite a pristine timeline of inevitable victories. We are not doing a triumphal march.
No, not at all.
We are here to examine the agonizing isolation of true leadership. We need to understand why this acerbic, curmudgeonly, fiercely stubborn man was the unglamorous yet absolutely necessary atlas of American independence.
The Atlas. I like that.
Yeah, we have to look at the immense weight of the invisible crown he chose to wear.
And to understand the roaring fire of his later political life, we have to start with the modest, almost damp kindling of his early years. We have to look at the spark in the dark.
Which was not very bright at first.
No, John Adams was born in 1735 in Braintree, Massachusetts, and what immediately stands out in the primary text is just how thoroughly unelite his origins were.
Right.
He was descended from farmers, from maltsters, brewers. He was a man with dirt under his fingernails in a way that some of his aristocratic Virginian counterparts simply were not.
Yeah, and that social standing manifested in a very painful, specific way when he arrived at Harvard College in 1751.
Oh, the ranking.
Yes, the ranking.
True.
We tend to project modern meritocracies backward, thinking it was all about grades. But in those days, Harvard didn't rank its incoming students by academic merit or entrance exams or intellectual promise.
Which is wild to think about today.
It is. They ranked them strictly based on the dignity of family. It was an explicit, institutionalized measure of your bloodline's social hierarchy within New England.
Wow.
And out of a class of 25 young men, John Adams was ranked 14th.
14th. Just right in the murky middle.
Exactly. Not the absolute bottom, but nowhere near the top. And that 14th place ranking wasn't just a trivial piece of trivia. It was a constant, glaring, daily reminder of his non-elite status.
I can imagine.
Every time he sat in a classroom or walked in a procession, his physical placement told him he was inferior. It instilled in him a profound, lifelong insecurity.
Yeah, but crucially, it also ignited a fierce, burning drive. If he could not rely on inherited privilege, he would have to prove his worth through sheer, overwhelming intellectual labor. He had to dig his treasures with his own fingers, as he once put it.
And that labor was grueling.
Yeah.
After Harvard, he goes to teach school in Worcester, Massachusetts, and he is deeply, profoundly depressed by it.
He hated it.
He really did. He writes in his diary, which is just a goldmine of his inner neuroses, by the way.
Oh, it really is.
He writes that the school is a wasteland. He calls it a little world made up of fops, buffoons, sycophants, and fools.
Such a curmudgeon even then.
Even then,
Yeah.
he's adrift. He is agonizing over whether he will ever achieve anything of note, just terrified of slipping into historical obscurity. So he aggressively pivots to the law. And, he builds a fortress out of it.
He drafts a 7-year self-study plan that would break most modern law students.
Easily.
And he isn't just learning the mechanical day-to-day business of drawing up deeds or settling property disputes. He dives into the deepest philosophical roots of Western jurisprudence. He is reading Justinian, he is reading Lord Coke.
Right. Let's pause there, though, because those names get thrown around in historical texts, but we need to understand why mastering them was essentially a colonial superpower. Why Justinian and Coke?
Well, it's the synthesis of two entirely different legal universes.
Okay.
By reading Justinian, Adams is absorbing the ancient Roman civil code. He is learning the overarching macro-level principles of how a state is structured, how society is ordered from the top down.
The big picture stuff.
Exactly. But by reading Lord Coke, he is mastering the English common law tradition. Coke is all about the gritty, case-by-case, centuries-long defense of individual rights against the arbitrary power of the crown.
So he's getting both sides of the coin.
Yes. Adams is building a legal mind that understands both the necessity of state authority and the absolute sanctity of individual liberty. He's constantly at war with his own perceived inadequacies, writing in his diary about his brains being in a state of chaos. But this relentless study forges a mind capable of designing a republic. Which brings us to the defining crucible of his early career. The moment that truly tests whether all that reading was just intellectual vanity or an actual bedrock of principle.
The Boston Massacre.
Right. It's the winter of 1770. British soldiers, cornered by an angry, violent mob in the snowy streets, open fire. 5 colonists are killed. The city is vibrating with a demand for blood.
It was a powder keg.
It really was. The soldiers and their captain, Thomas Preston, are indicted for murder. The threat of mob violence against anyone who dares to take their case is terrifyingly real. And yet, John Adams takes the job.
He does. And we have to sit with the sheer weight of that decision.
Yeah.
I mean, why would a young lawyer who is finally starting to build a comfortable life, who has a growing family and a burgeoning reputation, risk his physical safety and his standing among his neighbors to defend the most hated men in Massachusetts?
It seems crazy.
It does. And he certainly didn't do it out of any lingering affection for the British occupation. He despised the occupation.
He did it because he knew that a fragile society, one teetering on the edge of a justified rebellion, would collapse into absolute tyranny if it abandoned the impartial rule of law.
Exactly.
He famously told the court that fact, evidence, and law would justify the defense.
And he didn't just stand up and deliver lofty philosophical speeches. He went to work. He systematically dismantled the prosecution's case by focusing on the physical reality of that night.
The details.
Yes. He brought in witnesses to testify about the sheer size of the mob, the chaos of the fire bells ringing which disoriented the soldiers, the chunks of ice and heavy clubs being hurled at their heads.
Wow.
He forced the jury to put themselves in the shoes of those terrified sentries. He appealed to their reason over their rage, establishing the physiological terror of the soldiers to invoke a genuine claim of self-defense.
And it worked. He secured acquittals for Captain Preston and most of the soldiers and drastically reduced charges for the rest. It was a monumental triumph of the law over mob passion.
A huge turning point.
But I want to push back slightly on the pure nobility of it. Knowing Adams's intense vanity, his desperate need to prove his intellectual superiority, was this purely a sacrifice for the law? Or was it also Adams seizing a moment to show the Boston elite that he was the only man brave enough and smart enough to pull this off?
Well, that is the eternal contradiction of John Adams. It was absolutely both.
Right.
He was a man of profound principle, but he was also deeply vain. He wanted the martyrdom, and he wanted the applause for enduring the martyrdom.
Which is such a human flaw.
It is. But regardless of his internal ego, the external result was the same. He saved the integrity of the Massachusetts legal system. If the mob had dictated the outcome of a trial through intimidation, the concept of American liberty would have been poisoned in the womb. But the toll it took on him was severe. He suffered extreme stress, what he called a shattering of his nerves.
There is a brilliant analogy in Christopher Piersnick's reflections on this. He points out a comparison that is almost haunting when you think about how we remember our founders. Preferring John Adams to George Washington, he writes, is a lot like preferring Batman to Superman.
I love that analogy.
Right. Washington was the marble man. He carefully curated his image, never showing a flaw, standing serenely above the fray.
While Adams is entirely grounded in the messy, agonizing reality of human nature, he doesn't have the luxury of standing above the mud. He is down in it, taking the blows, doing the grim, unpopular work that actually holds society together.
The dark night of the Founding Fathers.
Exactly. Washington possessed a mythic perfection, but Adams possessed a gritty, painful humanity.
It demands a dark reflection from you, the listener. Imagine standing up for the most despised, violently hated people in your own city against the screaming demands of your own neighbors, just to prove an invisible constitutional principle. How many of us would willingly become a pariah for the sake of the law?
Very few.
Adams did. But that very same unbending rigidity, that willingness to endure the hatred of the crowd, becomes both his greatest weapon and his greatest curse as we move forward into the Continental Congress.
Because the stakes elevate from the survival of a few soldiers to the birth of an entire nation. In the years between 1774 and 1777, Adams is in Philadelphia. And while the fire of his stubbornness helps forge the country, he is leaving his own hearth devastatingly cold.
Yeah. We always picture Thomas Jefferson in Philadelphia, the quiet, graceful, elegant writer penning the Declaration in a serene room. But Adams was the loud, insistent, relentless engine on the floor of the Congress.
He was everywhere.
He served on upwards of 90 committees. 90! He was the one arguing, cajoling, alienating people, forcing the issue of independence day after day when half the delegates were terrified of the very idea and just wanted to reconcile with the king.
Jefferson himself later called Adams the Colossus of independence. But the cost of being that Colossus was his family. The distance between Philadelphia and Braintree wasn't just a matter of miles. In an era of war, rampant disease, and incredibly slow communication, it was a chasm of anxiety and dread.
And we cannot speak of the shadows of John Adams' life without speaking of Abigail. The sources make this abundantly clear. Without Abigail, there is no John.
Absolutely not.
She was his intellectual equal, his political compass, and his anchor to reality. But the burden she was left to carry is staggering.
The C-SPAN sources detail this beautifully. She was famously the eyes of the revolution. She literally took their young son, John Quincy, to Penn's Hill, near their farm, to watch the smoke rising for the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Just imagine that as a mother.
Right. She is writing to John with real-time military intelligence while the war is raging on her doorstep. With the local schools closed, she turns her parlor into a classroom for their 4 children. She is managing a farm to keep them from starving. She is housing militiamen in her attic. She is bearing the entire physical and emotional weight of a household in a war zone, entirely alone.
And it leads to a profound, crushing tragedy in 1777. John is in Philadelphia, completely consumed by the monumental architecture of a new nation. He is writing these soaring, intellectually triumphant letters about politics and the future.
While oblivious to what's happening at home.
Exactly. Back in Braintree, Abigail is living a nightmare. She had a terrible premonition about her pregnancy, and tragically, she was right. She delivered a stillborn daughter.
The letters surrounding this event are excruciating to read. The disconnect is jarring. She's literally burying their child, enduring the most profound grief a mother can know, while letters arrive from her husband celebrating political maneuvers.
Which makes me want to challenge the romanticized narrative we often build around this. We talk about the founders' sacrifices, and we usually mean they risked their wealth or their necks. But reading these letters, I have to ask, at what point does duty to one's country cross the line into the betrayal of one's family?
That is a very difficult question.
John Adams chose the abstract concept of posterity over the tangible presence of his own wife and children in their darkest hours. Was he just a bad father and a negligent husband hiding behind the shield of patriotism?
That is the darkest shadow over his legacy, and it is a guilt he carried to his grave. He was agonizingly aware of what he was missing and what he was forcing Abigail to endure. He wrote to her once, "Poor unhappy I who have never an opportunity to share with my family their distresses."
So he knew.
He felt the guilt deeply. But he was trapped by his own conviction that if he stepped away, the revolution would fail. Abigail, remarkably, shared his vision. She viewed her suffering as a patriotic necessity, writing that history required instances of patriotic virtue in the female sex.
Which is incredibly stoic.
It is. But knowing she accepted the burden doesn't make the reality of her burying a child alone any less devastating.
And the cruelty of history is that the sacrifices don't end with the Declaration of Independence. Because right as you think the hardest, most dangerous part is over, the theater of his suffering merely shifts.
Out of the frying pan and into the fire.
Or in this case, into the freezing ocean. We move from the political fires of Philadelphia to the freezing, isolating waters of the Atlantic and the courts of Europe.
Yes. In 1778, Congress decides they need Adams in Europe to help secure alliances and, more importantly, funding. So he boards the frigate Boston with his 10-year-old son, John Quincy.
Just a kid.
Right. And this voyage is a nightmare. They're sailing in the dead of winter. They sail into a massive storm that Adams is convinced will send them to the bottom of the ocean.
And if the weather wasn't enough, they engage in actual combat with a heavily armed British warship on the way over. A cannonball shatters the deck right near where Adams is standing. He is literally covered in the splintered wood of the ship.
Narrowly escaping death before he even gets there.
He survives this, arrives in France, and steps into a world that is completely, fundamentally alien to his puritanical soul. He joins Benjamin Franklin, who is already there as an American commissioner, and the contrast between these two men is painful.
It is the collision of two completely different, incompatible realities. Franklin is the absolute toast of Paris. He is adored by the French court.
He knew how to play the game.
Oh, perfectly. He is glamorous, smooth, playing the role of the rustic, fur hat-wearing American philosopher to perfection, while simultaneously indulging in the decadence of Parisian salons.
And then there's Adams.
Right. Adams, on the other hand, is stiff, entirely uncharming, and deeply worried that the virtuous Republican values of America are going to be corrupted by the cynical, aristocratic power politics of Europe.
He feels totally overshadowed and entirely useless. He writes this heartbreaking line in his diary saying he feels like he is kicking and sprawling in the mire of total neglect.
Such a vivid image.
It is. He is a man of blunt action, thrust into a world of whispered court intrigues. The mechanic and the salesman analogy fit so perfectly here, but the reality of it is so bitter for Adams.
It is. Think of the nascent United States as a struggling prototype. Adams is the mechanic. He is the one covered in grease, doing the backbreaking, unglamorous work of tightening the bolts, drafting the legal frameworks, making sure the engine of the state doesn't literally explode.
Right, making sure the thing actually runs.
Exactly. Franklin is the salesman in the showroom, shaking hands, flashing a smile, selling the dream to wealthy investors. And in the end, it is the salesman who gets the applause and the portrait in the gallery. But the machine doesn't move an inch without the mechanic.
And Adams, realizing he's useless as a salesman in France, takes it upon himself to do the mechanic's work elsewhere. He travels to the Netherlands. He recognizes that America didn't just need French soldiers. It desperately needed hard currency. It needed credit to buy weapons and pay troops.
So he goes to Amsterdam, the financial capital of the world at the time. And the mechanism of his success there is a testament to his sheer grinding intellect. He doesn't appeal to their sense of liberty. He knows Dutch bankers care about yield and risk.
It's all about the numbers.
Yes, he uses his legal mind to write exhaustive essays to relentlessly lobby the bankers, systematically convincing them that Great Britain is a declining asset and the United States is a legitimate sovereign nation capable of paying its debts. He plays on their historical Republican pride and their financial self-interest.
And against all odds, it works. He single-handedly secures diplomatic recognition from the Netherlands and negotiates massive, vital loans that quite literally keep the American government from going bankrupt. It is a monumental victory.
But the cost, again, is his own body.
The stress of it, the endless, solitary negotiations, the fear of failure, the damp Dutch winter, it causes a total physical and emotional collapse. He falls into a fever, goes into a coma, and nearly dies. He gave his physical health to fund the revolution.
And what is his reward when he finally returns home? He steps back onto American soil, only to walk into a shadow he can never, ever escape. He steps into the presidency immediately following George Washington.
The era of the invisible heavy crown. He serves as vice president under Washington for 8 years, an office he famously called the most insignificant invention of the human mind.
He really hated that job.
He did. And then in 1796, he wins the presidency by a razor-thin margin.
Following Washington was an impossible, unwinnable inheritance. Washington wasn't just a president. He was a living demigod. Stepping into that office was stepping into a void that could never be filled.
Setting himself up for failure.
And because of the electoral rules at the time, his great rival, Thomas Jefferson, coming in second, becomes his vice president. Abigail saw the writing on the wall immediately. She dubbed the White House a splendid misery.
Misery is the perfect word. Because Adams finds himself completely politically isolated. He is a man without a true country in his own capital. I think we need to look closely at his specific political philosophy to understand why he was so hated by both sides. He wasn't just a generic Federalist.
No, he wasn't. The political landscape was bitterly divided. You had the Hamiltonian Federalists, who wanted a powerful central government, a standing army, and a financial aristocracy.
Right.
And you had the Jeffersonian Democratic Republicans, who favored decentralized power, states' rights, and a populist agrarian society. Adams fit into neither camp.
He was on his own island.
He held to a very specific elite republicanism. He was obsessed with the fear of oligarchy, the idea that a few wealthy men would capture the government. But he also deeply feared the chaotic passions of the unchecked mob.
Yeah.
He believed the executive branch had to be a completely independent, disinterested arbiter, standing above the factions to balance the rich against the poor.
But refusing to play the partisan game meant he had no allies. He is betrayed from within his own cabinet by Alexander Hamilton, who is literally pulling the strings of Adams's own secretaries behind his back.
A total betrayal.
Hamilton and the High Federalists are pushing relentlessly for a full-scale war with France. The French were seizing American ships, the public was outraged, and there was a massive fever for war.
And war would have given Hamilton a standing army and the perfect excuse to crush his domestic political enemies under the guise of national security. But Adams looked at the fragile United States, deeply divided and heavily in debt, and knew that a protracted war with the European superpower would likely destroy the Union entirely.
So he does what he does best. He stubbornly refuses to give the mob what it wants. He sends peace envoys to France, keeping the U.S. out of an all-out war.
It is his proudest achievement. He saved the country.
But we have to address the darkest, most indefensible stain on his legacy during this exact same crisis. The Alien and Sedition Acts. I have to push back hard here. We just spent 20 minutes praising Adams for defending the British soldiers in Boston because of his unshakable belief in the impartial rule of law.
Right.
How on earth do we reconcile that young lawyer with the president who signed laws criminalizing the criticism of the federal government? It feels like a massive hypocritical failure of everything he claimed to stand for.
It is a profound failure. There is no historical whitewashing that can erase it.
Okay.
In the grip of the quasi-war hysteria, the Federalist Congress passed these acts to suppress the Democratic-Republican press and deport immigrants who voted against them. Now, contextually, and to be impartial here, Adams did not draft these laws, nor did he actively enforce them with the zeal Hamilton wanted.
But he still signed them.
Yes. He viewed them primarily as a war measure, but he signed them. He allowed his signature to endorse the criminalization of speech. For a man obsessed with the architecture of justice, allowing his fear of French revolutionary anarchy to override the First Amendment is the great tragedy of his presidency.
Yet, almost simultaneously, when faced with actual armed populist defiance, like Fry's rebellion in Pennsylvania, where farmers revolted against the taxes levied for the military buildup, he completely bucks the authoritarian impulse.
Which is fascinating.
Hamilton and his cabinet demanded a brutal show of federal force to crush the rebels and hang the leaders for treason.
And this is where the true Adams reemerges. He ignores his cabinet, he listens to his own conscience and to the Council of Abigail, and he pardons the leaders of the rebellion.
He just pardons them?
He looked at the evidence, realized it was a localized riot and not treason against the state, and chose mercy. He valued human life and domestic peace over political posturing.
Which poses a harrowing question for anyone listening. If doing the absolute right thing for your country, saving it from a ruinous war, pardoning misled citizens, guarantees that you will lose your job, that your party will abandon you, and that your legacy will be tarnished for centuries, do you still do it?
Most people wouldn't.
But Adams passed the ultimate test of integrity, knowing exactly what it would cost him.
And the bill for that integrity came due in the devastating year of 1800. The embers of his public life burned very, very low here. The election of 1800 was one of the most vitriolic, fear-mongering campaigns in American history.
It was incredibly ugly.
Adams, abandoned by Hamilton and viciously attacked by Jefferson's press machinery, lost the presidency. It was a complete repudiation of his administration and, in his mind, a rejection of his core ideas about governance. On the morning of Jefferson's inauguration, Adams couldn't bear to stay. He boarded a stagecoach out of Washington in the cold pre-dawn hours.
The political humiliation was agonizing, but it was eclipsed by unimaginable personal agony. That same year, 1800, his son Charles died. Charles had succumbed to severe alcoholism and died essentially destitute.
It's just tragedy after tragedy.
We touched on it earlier, but the children of the founders grew up in a crucible, raised by a mother under constant wartime threat, with a father who was an absent, towering, impossibly demanding historical figure. The psychological damage inflicted on the Adams children was immense.
Adams was shattered. Initially, he tried to stoically stand off from the pain, reverting to that strict New England emotional armor, refusing to even see Charles at the end. But the guilt broke him. Later, he would confess to Jefferson that the loss of Charles was the greatest grief of my life.
It's brutal.
So, picture him in 1801, a man who gave his youth, his health, his peace of mind, and his family to his country. And his reward is to be rejected by the voters, betrayed by his allies, and broken by the death of his child.
He retreats to Peacefield, his farm in Quincy, Massachusetts. And I am struck by a stark, evocative image from the sources regarding Abigail. During their brief final months in the unfinished White House in Washington, Abigail had to hang the family's wet laundry in the Great East Room because it was the only place warm and dry enough.
I remember reading that.
Think of the damp, drafty, half-built halls of power, filled with the mundane, cold reality of wet linen. It perfectly mirrors the cold reality of their political exile. Adams always claimed he just wanted to return to his plow, to be a simple farmer. But reading his diaries, you feel the bitter sting of rejection. He was a man of monumental ideas, and the nation had chosen someone else's.
The shadows are darkest in these years. He spends the next decade and a half in a quiet, almost enforced irrelevance with Abigail. He sits in his library, watching from the sidelines as Jefferson and then Madison dismantle parts of the system he helped build, or hypocritically adopt his methods when it suits them.
That must have driven him crazy.
Oh, he is writing furiously in the margins of his books, arguing with dead philosophers, desperate to secure his place in history, while feeling profoundly unfairly overlooked.
But just as the fire seems to burn out completely, a final, unexpected warmth emerges. We reach the twilight. The year 1818 brings the final, most devastating blow of his life. Abigail, his dearest friend, his equal, his anchor for over half a century, dies of typhoid fever.
The end of an era.
Adams is 83. The grief is absolute. He writes a letter to his old friend and bitter rival, Thomas Jefferson, and the sentence he writes just stops you in your tracks. If only I could lie down beside her and die, too.
It breaks your heart. And the fact that he was writing to Jefferson at all is the miracle of his final years. Back in 1812, Dr. Benjamin Rush, another signer of the Declaration, essentially played the role of historical therapist.
Thank goodness for Benjamin Rush.
Truly. He relentlessly badgered both Adams and Jefferson, telling them they had a sacred duty to history and to their own souls to resume contact.
And they did. For 14 years, these two brilliant aging titans exchanged letters. It is one of the most remarkable correspondences in human history.
They didn't just exchange pleasantries, they waded right back into the deep waters. They argued fiercely about the French Revolution, about religion, about the nature of humanity.
Neither of them backed down.
No. Adams pushed Jefferson on the reality of human inequality, arguing that an artificial aristocracy of wealth and beauty would always threaten to dominate society, challenging Jefferson's overly optimistic faith in the innate goodness of the common man. But through the debate, they found common ground in their shared revolutionary past. They proved that the deepest political and personal wounds could be healed through honest, rigorous, respectful dialogue.
It is a masterclass in civic duty. They realized that their shared creation, the United States, was more important than their personal enmity, and then the ending. It is so perfectly, impossibly cinematic that if you wrote it in a script, it would be rejected as unbelievable. They both die on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826.
The 50th anniversary, to the day, of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence.
I want you to sit with that for a moment as the embers fade. These two opposing minds, the gritty mechanic and the brilliant salesman. The conservative realist who feared the mob and the idealistic populist who feared the crown. Massachusetts and Virginia, they were the two halves of the same American soul.
Beautifully put.
And it is almost as if neither of them could truly leave this world until they had forgiven each other, until they had firmly secured the legacy of the nation they built together. Adams's reported last words were, "Thomas Jefferson survives." He had no way of knowing that Jefferson had passed away just hours earlier in his own bed in Virginia.
It is a profound, poetic conclusion to a life defined by relentless, exhausting struggle.
And so the fire has finally burned down to ash. The creeping shadows have filled the room. We look back at the heavy toll of John Adams's life. It was a life of agonizing separations, of political betrayals, of crushing burdens borne by a flawed, vain, brilliant, and deeply human man. A man who possessed the rarest, most difficult kind of courage, the absolute refusal to pander, the refusal to tell people what they wanted to hear.
Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder in the dark. We live in an era, much like the ones that followed Adams, that worships charisma. We crave crowd-pleasing leadership, smooth rhetoric, the flawless, comforting image of the Superman.
Right.
But what if John Adams's curmudgeonly nature, his abrasive stubbornness, and his total lack of charm is the exact bitter medicine that prevents democracy from burning itself to the ground? What if the leaders we actually need to survive the darkest winters are the very ones we can't stand?
A heavy question for a heavy history. Thank you for pulling up a chair and joining us by the fire for this deep dive into the shadows. Until next time, keep looking past the marble.